Welcome everyone. We're now in, oh lordy, I can't remember what hour it is. We're getting towards three-quarters of the way through the show, I think. Still got a few hours left to go. It's a huge honour for me to welcome, for the first time on the charity event for us, Professor Chris French, who is a professor of psychology at Goldsmiths University in London. And rather than me tell you what he does, I'm going to invite him to tell you what work he researches in. Chris.
Okay. Well, thank you for asking me to take part. Very excited about it. Basically, I had the anomalistic psychology research unit, and then the first question everybody asks is, what is anomalistic psychology? So anomalistic psychology is the psychology of trying to use psychology to understand ostensibly paranormal experiences and weird beliefs, all that kind of thing, or sometimes I just refer to it as the psychology of weird shit, because that's essentially what it is.
And you're obviously next to Mr. Godbehere, who is a famous YouTuber. Tell us, Mr. Godbehere, you're in a similar line of work.
Yes, I've just gone to this little place called Cambridge University, where I am currently doing a PhD into disgust in early modern England. I think I'm narrowing it down to England. So I end up looking at sympathetic magic, witchcraft, all those things that those people found disgusting and so persecuted. So we have a lot of crossover. I need to pick this guy's brains on a regular basis to work out what the hell is going on back there.
Well, I've got one simple question for you, which I think will probably fill in more than an hour. The simple question is this. Why do people believe weird shit?
Right, well, yeah, that is the $64,000 question, or $1 million question, if you're going for James Randi's challenge. There are all kinds of reasons, and that's what makes it such a fascinating area. You can look at so many different aspects. One of the things we're doing at the moment is working on a textbook. An approach that we've taken in the textbook is to look at each of the sub-disciplines of psychology and say, what light can that approach cast on these kinds of beliefs, these kinds of experiences? So when you think about it, you think about developmental psychology, we tell our kids all kinds of stuff. You know, we tell them that every year a big fat guy in a red suit comes down the chimney and leaves them toys. We tell them all kinds of things that we know are not true. We encourage them to have magical beliefs, and then we expect them to kind of grow out of them.
Not true.
sorry, not true. You know, so I have a PhD student who's been looking at that, looking at the kind of children's understanding of magic. So at what point do children begin to say, when they're watching a conjurer, that's a trick. I don't know how you're doing it, but it's a trick. You can look at the neuropsychological aspects, what's happening in the brain, why do some people develop obsessions about religion, for example, and so on and so forth. And I think, I suppose in very broad brushstroke terms, there are at least two important aspects here. One are the cognitive factors that can lead us to develop these kinds of beliefs and interpret things around us as being paranormal when maybe they're not. In evolutionary terms, our brains have evolved to help us stay alive. That's all they're there for. They're not about helping us to apprehend the truth. And so we think in terms of quick and dirty rules of thumb, heuristics. And generally, these heuristics work really well. They give us the right answer very quickly. And that makes much more sense in evolutionary terms than thinking in this other mode of thought that we have, this more rational, reflective, slower mode of thought, which would give us the right answer slightly more often, but would take a lot longer. In survival terms, it's better that we do it very quickly and we're usually right. And there's also, as people like Michael Shermer have pointed out, and various others, there's a price, usually more of a price to pay for thinking mistakenly that there is something meaningful there, something important, when there isn't, than the other way around, and missing something important when it is there. So we're interested in all those kinds of cognitive biases, and that covers a huge area. We're interested in the way that people form judgments, perception, memory, the whole kit and caboodle. And then on the other side of the coin, but obviously very closely related to, is the stuff that's more what Richard's into, the emotional side, the motivational side. And again, obviously these two areas are related, but I mean, at the risk of stating the bleeding obvious, one of the greatest fears that we have is fear of our own mortality, and the idea that other people around us that we love, that when they die, the physical body means no more consciousness. Once the brain's gone, no more consciousness. So anything that can support a belief in life after death, any evidence, no matter how flimsy, we clutch onto it, we grab onto it. And I think those are two of the most important factors, but then there's lots of other stuff comes in as well. I mean, we know that people do have weird experiences for a whole variety of reasons, and then they fit into this wider paranormal or religious framework and seem to reinforce it and support it.
Do you want to comment, Richard, on your take on this?
Yes. I mean, from my slightly narrow viewpoint, but I find that there are sort of certain emotional motivations that can lead to belief. It's very complicated, but you get things like, I'll take witchcraft as an example. Many of the witches were outsiders, and when something happened, say someone got diseased or ill, they would try and find some sort of explanation for it. So again, you go to the heuristics, it must be that outsider doing something. This is when you get into sympathetic magic, that this person has the ability to contaminate someone without even touching them, just by looking at them quite often, and that will make them ill. And it's clutching at straws, trying to find explanations when you haven't got them. And then, what then happens is you get this contamination issue where, oh, how many more of them are there? How many more people are able to do this? And so, when you catch one witch, you want to know how far that contamination spread. And so you beat the living crap out of them until they tell you. And of course, when somebody's hung up with their arms the wrong way around, screaming in pain, and you say to them, Joseph, is Joseph a witch? And they think going, yes, might stop the pain. People tend to say yes a lot. That's where it's taken me. But yeah, it's all about trying to find explanations where you can't, and finding what seems to be the easiest emotional explanation, if you see what I mean, quite often.
I do see what you mean, but many of these things, much like religion, it filled in gaps in our knowledge. Those gaps are obviously reducing as understanding increases. We don't seem, well, maybe you can tell me whether we do or not, we don't seem to be seeing a reduction in belief in ghosts and paranormal activity and aliens and all sorts of stuff, or are we? Am I wrong in that?
Well, I'll go historically, something me and Chris have talked about in the past, that one of the areas of psychology that's quite interesting is why, since in Europe, since the Enlightenment really, have we suddenly got people saying, no, I don't believe that. If we're so inbuilt to believe all these things, we now have skeptics and rational thinkers and free thinkers and atheists and things that they were around before, but not really. They had to be very, very careful. And now we have this huge space of people who say, no, this is nonsense. Stop it. So actually, I do think belief in stuff is going down, or if nothing else, people who don't believe in it are actually coming out and talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole psychology of skepticism is a fascinating topic. I mean, we tend to think, and I think all three of us would class ourselves as skeptics, and a lot of the skeptical literature sometimes seems to implicitly assume that the norm is one of rationality, and that therefore what needs to be explained are these weird beliefs. But actually, you know, a lot of the psychological literature would suggest that the norm is not one of rationality. We are inherently very irrational beings. And then this raises this whole interesting question about what is it about these weird people who don't believe this stuff? You know, what's different about them? Why have they adopted a particular belief system that says, well, you know, we're only going to believe stuff if there's actually good, solid evidence for it, and if it makes sense in terms of rational argument. And I think there's a kind of, I would think that if you were to compare levels of belief in religion and the paranormal in, say, modern Europe, then now, and say 300 years ago, you would find a lot more atheism and agnosticism and so on than you would have found then. It would have been a very exceptional person indeed who stood up at that point and said, I'm not sure I believe all this stuff. Whereas now, you know, there are quite, I mean, and it's been quite interesting even over the last few years, the way the whole kind of, I hate to use the term skeptical movement because it sounds like it's all about propaganda and so on. I don't think it is that. But as a useful shorthand, the skeptical movement has really gone from strength to strength over the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, you can speculate about what may have caused that. I think Richard Dawkins, God delusion, the internet, various other factors. I mean, you know, there are now, what, about 50 branches of skeptics in the pub up and down the country, all pulling in crowds every month.
While we're on this subject, I was just going to say, I'd almost forgotten, Chris used to be the editor of the Skeptic magazine. He's now passed it on to Deborah Hyde, who is excellent. She sent me 3 lots of 3 of the last 3 Skeptic magazines, and we'll send a new one hot off the press. Now, at 3 lots, the 3 highest bidders in this hour, you're going to get them signed, okay? So get on with it.
Can I just ask you about the word skeptic, because
you can.
I think it's in common parlance in the States. It may have a slightly different meaning than it does here, but here I take the view that it's got negative connotations about it, and it's not seen as being open-minded or questioning as it is in America. In this country, I get the feeling that, certainly my understanding of the word, it's cynical, it's not trusting. And do you think that skeptic is a good word for the movement in this country?
Well, I mean, that's something that we've had endless discussions about. Because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for many people, the word skeptic just summons up this kind of image of a naysayer. You know, I mean, the whole idea of skeptics in the pub. One of the reasons I still find it kind of quite an amusing title because it kind of summons up images of, you know, old men with warm bitter all sitting around grumbling about, I don't believe that, that's not rubbish, that's nonsense, you know. And actually, if you go along to any of these meetings, you'll find it's anything but. There's a hell of a lot of humour. And that generally kind of, I mean, one of the nice things that's happened with the change over recent years is that whereas it was very male-dominated a few years back, it's now switched, and I'd say it's probably, you know, generally these meetings are about 60-40 in terms of male-female representation. But yes, that is a real problem. And even, so what we've got to try and do, and I think we're having some success in this, is to actually kind of enlighten people, perfectly good word there, I think, to actually kind of explain to them that skepticism isn't about saying, it's not about rejecting claims, it's about doubting them in the true sense of the word and saying, show me the evidence. If the evidence is there that telepathy is real, that people are really being abducted by aliens, etc., then, you know, we ought to let that convince us. And I think one of the things that struck me is that we've now got people who label themselves as skeptics that we don't really want. You know, we've got climate change skeptics, we've got Holocaust deniers who label themselves as skeptics. And I guess the only reason that they would want the label skeptics is because they think it's actually got some positive connotations. Now, even conspiracy theorists could, in some sense, legitimately call themselves skeptics because they're questioning the official view. I would say that conspiracy theorists, which again is another area we've done quite a lot of research on lately, a really fascinating area, I always think of them as being kind of skeptics without proper critical thinking tools. They may be skeptical in one sense, but they don't know how to think about evidence. Okay.
Well, conspiracy theories are something I certainly would love to touch upon. And I'm going to open it up. If people would like to talk to Professor Chris or Mr. Godbehere, we will open up the line, send a contact request through Skype to Magic Sandwich Show. We'll see if we can get you on. Chris, I wanted to go back, though, before we move on to conspiracy theories, and trust me, we will go there. You will probably recall that we had a discussion about this 18 months ago. But before we go on, you mentioned the belief in Santa and that people lose that. But they don't lose their belief in religion in the same way. And there are a number of issues which I can identify, perhaps incorrectly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that may make people hold on to this religious belief. One, of course, is the social reinforcement, the state reinforcement, the Church of England and the like. Unlike Santa, you're not told that God doesn't exist. But you also identified, I think, another one, which is the fear of death and the hope of an afterlife. And I think a third one may be the hope that there is someone looking after you. Would you say that those are three valid factors? And if you could, what priority would you put them in?
That's an interesting question. Possibly the order that you've just mentioned them in, I think. I mean, I think one of the things, which, I'm obviously generally approaching these things from a kind of psychological point of view. And one of the things, the risks there, is that you're focusing very much on the individual. But of course, we're all in our own particular culture, and very often we're not even aware of the fact that this gives us a particular kind of default set of beliefs, if you like. We're brought up, we're told, most of the stuff we know, we don't know through direct experience. We know because someone's told us, either our parents or teachers or the media or whoever. And again, another good general default position is to assume that what you are told is true unless you have a good reason to doubt it. I mean, a lot of the things, that you're told by your parents when you grow up, don't touch that, it'll burn you, don't do this, don't do that. You've no direct experience that what they're saying is true, but it's a good idea to trust them on these things. And so, because of that, we just accept a lot of what we're told because it's part of our culture. I think it's always interesting to think about these kinds of issues from a cross-cultural perspective, because that really highlights that. We can see documentaries on TV about tribes in non-industrialized societies, and it strikes us as obvious that some of their beliefs are obviously just nonsense. But when we have maybe some people who believe that bread and wine can be turned into flesh and blood during particular religious rituals, that's kind of accepted by a lot of people, which just strikes me as kind of as bizarre. And one of the things I do in my lectures is I always ask the students how many of them believe in fairies, and you usually get maybe one or two jokers that will put their hands up, but that's it. Everybody else thinks, no, of course I don't believe in fairies. But you only have to look back about 100 years, and belief in fairies in educated Western Europeans was quite high, thanks to lots of sightings, thanks to books by intelligent and influential people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And the evidence was exactly the same kind of evidence as people now base their belief in aliens abducting people. But, when you can see it from a distance, either historically or geographically, these things come out. So I think that would be the number one on that list that you gave. And again, I think that, as I said before, I think that our fear of our own mortality is also an incredibly strong motivational force. And then that nice idea, which I think really begins to overlap with other kind of superstitious beliefs about what can bring good fortune and avoid bad fortune, the idea that there is someone up there, be it God or be it our own personal guardian angel, that will look after us and take care of us. We find that idea very comforting, and again, we don't need very much evidence to believe it.
Also, historically, there has been a shift. If you look at history, there was always a very... I'm going to say Christianity because it's easy to pick on. Basically, it was wrong to question things, because that's how we got in trouble in the first place. We were inquisitive and ate that apple that looked interesting, and that snake was about. So you weren't supposed to question things. To be more like God, you were supposed to just believe and instinctively have faith and move, and if you start to question things, that's a bad thing. That's one of those cultural differences. And I think there are still people personally who still have what I think of as the medieval mindset, that they are brought up to think that questioning is a bad idea. I mean, there's that guy in America, that group, that one of their one of their, whatever it was, their manifesto pledges was to stop critical thinking and other mind-altering things being taught in schools. And you think, how on earth in 2012 can someone think that's a positive? And I think it's an example of old cultures dying hard, personally.
There are many, going back to a point I made earlier, there are many examples, and you can see this as people using the idea of a God to answer questions. But at the same time, there are many things where this idea of supplying an answer doesn't work. The idea of these people who believe in alien abductions, that's not there to fill a gap of knowledge. That's just a flight of fancy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of that's why I said that there's so many factors that come into play here. Taking an alien abduction claim that as a very good example. There are so many different factors that come in there. On the one hand, there's a subculture that do believe in alien abductions. There are lots more books that are pro these alien abduction accounts than are skeptical about them. There's a lot. The media coverage often won't include any kind of skeptical voices, or if they do, you can very often just be the token skeptic. You're there to voice an opinion, but the commentary is going to make it pretty clear that this is not really the proper explanation. So you've got that on the one hand, as we referred to earlier. But I think one of the important, there are other important factors that come in here. Personally, I think that alien abduction claims are a really nice example of a kind of an extreme false memory. But then you've got the question, well, why do these people have the false memory? And there isn't a one-size-fits-all explanation, but we do know that in a lot of these cases, these are people who've suffered from episodes of sleep paralysis. And I'm sure lots of your listeners already know what sleep paralysis is, but for those that don't, sleep paralysis in its most basic form is very common. About 40% of people suffer from it at least once in their lives. And it's when you're half awake and half asleep and you realise that you can't move. And it's kind of quite disturbing, but it usually lasts a few seconds. You snap out of it and that's fine. In about 5% of the population, you get some other symptoms which make it a much more scary experience. You get a very strong sense of presence. Even if you can't see or hear anything else in the room, you feel that there is something in the room with you, and whatever it is, they've got evil intent towards you. You might actually get hallucinations. You might see dark shadows or lights, or even monsters, grotesque figures in the room. You might hear voices or footsteps or mechanical sounds. You might feel as if you're being touched or as if you're being dragged out of the bed, and sometimes turn into a full-blown out-of-body experience. There's also a kind of sense of pressure on the chest, difficulty breathing, and the whole thing can be absolutely terrifying. Now, if you've had this experience, and particularly if you get it repeatedly and you don't know what it is, you may end up thinking, well, either something terrifying really is happening to me when I go to bed at night, or I'm going crazy. And most people would
why are all these experiences normally associated with probing and some sort of sexual element?
Well, this is one of the interesting things about the whole experience, is that it's very rare that people actually see any aliens or any spaceships during these episodes. And so you think, well, hang on, okay, I can see it was a terrifying experience, but why the anal probe, What actually happens is that you typically find with these cases that you have some event experience like that, or maybe some other equally bizarre or anomalous experience that people want an explanation for, and it's then that they may stumble across UFO books that say, if you've ever had an experience like this, you've probably been abducted by aliens and they've wiped your memory for the rest of the event. And so then you'll seek out the services of a hypnotherapist for hypnotic regression, and hey presto, we know people wrongly believe, thanks to too many Hollywood movies, that hypnosis provides this kind of magical key to unlock hidden or repressed memories. Well, we actually know from mountains of evidence that what it really does is it provides a context whereby you produce a narrative that's based on imagination, expectation, fantasy, bits of things you've seen on TV or read in books, all woven together, and then it feels very real. If you go in expecting that you've been abducted by aliens, that's what you'll find. If you go in thinking that your current traumas are due to problems you had in a past life, that's what you'll find. If you think it was due to satanic ritual abuse, that's what you'll find.
There's a guy I read a while ago called Godbehere, and he wrote an autobiography in the 12th century, and he talks about how his mother told him she woke up and was pinned down to her bed by demons, and the demons told her that her son was going to be a great man, and that they wanted to torture her for this, and then the demons were swept away by an angel, and I just read it and went, oh, sleep paralysis again. Yeah. Interesting.
One of the really interesting things is, I mean, a lot of the historical accounts, because, I mean, again, this cross-cultural thing comes in spades when you're looking at sleep paralysis, because we have our own interpretation. Most people in modern Western society have never heard of sleep paralysis, so they have no explanation, have no framework to think about it. In other cultures, they often do, but it's usually some kind of supernatural interpretation. So in Newfoundland, they talk about the old hag who comes and sits on the sleeper's chest. In Japan, it's kanashibari. In St. Lucia, it's kokmar, which is the souls of unbaptized children that crawl onto the sleeper's chest to throttle them. I mean, it's so creepy. But going back to Europe in the Middle Ages, it was sex-crazed demons. It was the incubus and the succubus. And you've even got there such a lovely parallel, because you mentioned before the sexual element. You know, what you've got with the incubus and the succubus is the idea that these demons would come, they could change into a female form, take sperm from men, and then turn to a male form and use that sperm to satanically impregnate their female victims. Yeah. And it's such a lovely parallel with the alien abduction stuff.
I'm just going to say my favourite of those stories, it comes from, I think it's Malleus Maleficorum, which means Hammer of the Witches. And basically, it's that a person was attacked by a witch in the night, they're pinned down, with several men, and the witch would steal their penises and then make a nest out of them for her familiar bird. It's a bit of a weird one, that one. I have this image of a nest of penises I can't get out of my head, I'm afraid.
No, we can put that thought in my head, thank you.
On that bombshell, can I just remind everyone, we are here for charity to raise money. And I would invite you, please, if you could, to go to one of the links above the video box on Mog TV and make a donation. And also, you might want to have a look at the eBay page, which still has many items up for sale. I also have one caller lined up. If you'd like to join Chris French and Richard Godbehere, then send a contact request to Magic Salmon Show. We hadn't planned this, but hey, we'll go with it. I do, though, because we're already halfway through our time. I do want to move on to conspiracy theories, because they're one of my favourites. But I do think that we should start, Chris, with you dealing with the criticism of one of your main protagonists, David Icke, who says you're a fucking idiot. How do you respond to that perfectly sound criticism?
Well, yes, I know. I knew this is. I think you're referring here to kind of one of my least proud moments on TV, which was where I had a confrontation with David Icke.
It was on a beach on the Isle of Man?
That's right, yeah, and they set it up as if it was the kind of gunfight at the OK Corral. So we kind of started out about 50 yards from each other and walked towards each other. Now the way that worked out was that originally there was going to be me and a colleague of mine who was working on the same programme, Patrick Lehman. We were both supposed to be going out to have this discussion with David Icke. And yeah, I confess that I would have asked exactly the same questions that David Icke asked, which is, well, have you read my books? To which I had to reply, because no, I haven't. I've read about your stuff, I know about your views generally, I know about the shape-shifting lizards, and really, yeah, there kind of comes a point where you think, do I really need to read the books, or is that something that's just going to be totally...
Chris, I have to say, I didn't mean to embarrass you or criticize you at all. I would have said the same thing. What is the point of reading this bullshit?
Well, exactly. But I mean, equally, from his point of view, I can see that that appears to be nothing other than prejudice. You have prejudged my theories and my views without looking at my evidence. But there is a kind of a more general point there, that obviously if you take a skeptical stance, I mean, my working hypothesis as an anomalistic psychologist is that, you know, paranormal forces do not exist. I don't take a hardline approach whereby I say I know that they don't, and if more evidence comes along in the future that actually produces a reliable, robust paranormal effect, I hope I'd be big enough to be able to say, okay, I was wrong. But you are constantly challenged by, well, what about this claim? What about that claim? What about the evidence over here? What about this over there? And of course, you just don't have enough hours in a day. And so you tend to focus, you have to choose what you're going to focus on. Now, I was taking part in a program on conspiracy theories there. You know, the producers were very excited that they got David Icke to appear as well, so, and who can blame them for that? But I was not going to waste my limited time reading any of that bullshit, basically. It's just, you know, life's too short. Yeah. But it was an embarrassing moment for me, and I still...
he's got to be the king of all conspiracy. I mean, he's into absolutely everything, isn't he? But that said, most people who believe in one form of conspiracy or another are far more likely, I imagine, to believe in another conspiracy. And what I've found in my experience, very frustratingly, is that they will come out with a load of purported facts and say, okay, let's go through them. Fact one, the Twin Towers fell at free fall speed, and you prove to them that they didn't. They don't at that stage say, oh, actually, you're right, sorry about that. They may say, oh yeah, but no, but yes, but no, but what about buildings, Trade Center 7?
Yeah.
And then you deal with that. Oh yeah, but no, but yeah, but no, but, and they come on to something else. And this to me is seems to be comparable with those that believe in religion, who say, oh yes, we know we can rely on this argument, and you say, well, no, you can't, because. Oh yes, but we can rely on this. They never want at any stage sort of like say, oh yes, you're right. And this is, I don't know whether you recall our brief conversation. This is what I spoke to you about 18 months ago. Yeah. About whether there was this sort of like comparison, legitimate comparison between religions, or people who are religious and people who are who believe in conspiracy theories.
Well, I mean, there were a few things to say on that. First of all, you know, I sympathise obviously 100%. Arguing with conspiracy theorists is like trying to nail jelly to the wall. You know, it's just impossible. I mean, there's recent research by Karen Douglas and her team at the University of Kent that shows that if people who believe in a particular conspiracy are also more likely to believe in a contradictory conspiracy theory. So, for example, if you think that Osama bin Laden is still alive, you're also more likely to believe that he was actually killed years ago, way before the Americans said that they did it. And you know, if you think that Princess Di was killed as a result of some kind of conspiracy, again, you're also more likely to believe that she's still alive. Now, you know, as they point out,
she's still alive, living on the moon with Shergar and
with Elvis, yeah. What the kind of important factor is doubt of the official version. So these people don't feel obliged, and they constantly play this trick of saying, you know, we're just asking questions. We're just asking questions. We're just raising legitimate doubts. We don't have to actually come up with, you know, a definitive counter explanation. We're just raising questions, and we're just kind of raising doubts and asking legitimate questions, which is actually, you know, not really a very appropriate way to do. If you've got a particular counter theory, say what it is, and we can examine the evidence, and if it falls apart, it falls apart. But they don't do that. And the thing about the link with religion, again, I think that's a very valid point. We have actually collected some data on that, and that we didn't ask about a specific set of religious beliefs. We asked about how important religiosity was for people, and we found that does significantly correlate with the tendency to endorse conspiracy theories.
I'm just going to butt in. I've been asked a while ago now, sorry, to repeat the offer and tell you to go to the Justgiving and the other websites to donate. That's 3 sets of 4 Skeptic magazines, the newest of which I've actually got an article in, so you know, hey,
good stuff.
And it's to the highest bidder during this hour, so get your fingers on your PayPals or hands in your pockets or however one you phrase it these days. Continue, sorry.
Yeah, well, there's so much I would like to talk about conspiracy theories. I know we've got 2 callers lined up, and I think it's probably best if I allow them to come on. It's going to be a slight change of topic, I think. But we're going to start with ADT, who wants to ask a question about something, a word so long that a dyslexic like me is not even going to attempt
Here we go.
to pronounce it. ADT, are you with us?
It's still on the same topic. I'd just like to know, I've been reading a book called Consciousness Explained by Daniel Dennett, and as a psychologist, when you're examining these people who believe in religion or have beliefs about something, he describes a method of a heterothemenology. Don't know if I said that right, but it's the idea that you treat their consciousness and what they're thinking as a, well, I perceive it as a fictional book, essentially. It's what they believe is true, and you can't say it's not true. Whether it has any truth values outside their mind, that's another thing. Is that the way that you study someone's beliefs, or do you use a more objective way?
Well, I mean, there are obviously lots of different approaches. What we spend a lot of our time doing is asking questions like, what might be the kinds of cognitive factors that would underlie these kinds of beliefs? So I'll just give you kind of one specific example. And there's lots of others I could have chosen. One of the things that we're interested in at the moment, with a lot of research into, is possible links between susceptibility to false memories and paranormal beliefs. Now, the underlying argument here would be that we know from previous research that that there are now various experimental techniques whereby you can assess people's susceptibility to false memories. Okay, I won't bore you with the details, but just take it from me, there are these techniques. What that allows you to do is to look at what other psychological variables might correlate with susceptibility to false memories. And it turns out it's things like fantasy proneness, hypnotic susceptibility, tendency to dissociate, and various others. And interestingly, those variables also correlate with paranormal belief and reports of paranormal experiences. And so that raises the possibility that some of these experiences that are being reported might just be based on false memories. And so we've done experimental studies where we've tried to look at that a bit more directly. What we did was to give 100 people a news coverage questionnaire. And what it looked like we were doing was, if I would say to you, where were you, who were you with, what were you doing when you first saw the Twin Towers collapse, I'm sure you'd be able to tell me, you'd be very confident about that memory. Here's an example of what psychologists call a flashbulb memory. Now, it looked like we were doing a study of flashbulb memories, but we were being a bit tricksy. We have 5 items, but one of them related to something that hadn't been caught on camera. Okay? So we asked, it was a particular incident that had actually happened but hadn't been filmed, but we asked people specifically, when did you first see the footage of this actually happening? And we found that the people who said, about a third of the people reported that they could remember this non-existent footage, and that in itself is quite interesting. But we also then found that those people who said they could remember the footage scored higher in terms of reporting paranormal experiences and paranormal beliefs. So that's more the kind of line we take, which I think is more of kind of an experimental approach. I sometimes get emails from people who are actually kind of having these experiences, or they report having them, and they're quite distressed by it. As you can imagine, a lot of these, if you think your house is haunted, or you think you've got a poltergeist, or you think that aliens are trying to take you away, that is a very, very distressing situation to be in. Now, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I'm not qualified to kind of really try to deal with those cases. But one thing I wouldn't do with those people is to take a hardline skeptical approach and say, oh, it's all nonsense, it's all in your head. Equally, I wouldn't want to refer them on to somebody who's going to say, oh, it's all real. So what I now can do, because I've got the appropriate contacts, is I can refer them on to clinical psychologists and counsellors who will basically take an approach which is kind of reminiscent of what you just said that Dennett says. They don't actually either endorse or contradict the claims that are being made. They just try to deal with the way that those beliefs and self-perceived experiences are affecting the person emotionally and try to deal with that.
That's very interesting, actually. It reminds me, the 9/11 experiment you were talking about reminds me of a show that I saw where they did something quite similar and found similar results. They effectively implanted false memories into people on a jury panel. But I guess this leads, I'm going to link back to the topic of, misbeliefs and conspiracy theories. But I guess what I want to ask is, do you have any view on what the consciousness is and how the conscious experience of someone links in with their ability to come up and accept these conspiracy theories?
First, to answer the first question, nope. I think consciousness is something that we are light years away from explaining. I mean, we have made real progress, and I wouldn't want to minimise that. But I think that in terms of, I hate to say this, but the philosophical understanding, I don't think we'd even know what the right answer would look like, what the general shape of it would be. I mean, we've still got this big problem of, obviously Descartes talks about dualism, about mind and body, and then you've got various people who take a monist approach, who say there's only one or there's only the other, but none of those explanations really seem to work. And so I think we're a long way from explaining consciousness. I think we know more about it now than we did. I mean, I think we know enough now to be able to reasonably safely say that the kind of illusion that we all have of a kind of unitary consciousness, that is an illusion. That, in fact, we know that the visual system processes colour in one part of the brain, movement in another part of the brain, other features, and yet somehow we have this conscious perception of that's fully integrated in the visual domain and so on. There's a lot of aspects of consciousness. We know how our consciousness can fool us, and that's very relevant, I think, to a lot of the stuff in my area. But I think we're miles away from a comprehensive explanation. Richard, have you got something?
Yeah, have you read Bruce Hood's latest?
I've not read the latest one yet, no.
That's basically about that. It's about the illusion of consciousness. What's it called?
Yeah.
I think it's called that, isn't it? The
self-illusion?
The self-illusion. Yeah. It's a very good book on this. Bruce Hood, The Self-Illusion.
Yeah.
Superb.
Yeah. So I forgot what the second part of the question was. Was it how consciousness relates to these kinds of beliefs and experiences?
Yes, that was correct.
Yeah. I think even though we're miles away from a full understanding, I think we know enough to sometimes be able to apply those ideas from the understanding we have got. I mean, I'll give you again one example. We kind of speculated that it may be the case that sometimes people think they are using psychic powers to make a decision about something, when in fact they have taken the information that's required in, but they weren't consciously aware of it. Okay, so we know that non-conscious processing does occur and can influence behaviour and beliefs. What we did in this experiment was to the participants in the experiment were told that it was an ESP experiment where they'd have to guess what symbol the computer would randomly choose on each trial. What we didn't tell them was on half the trials we were subliminally priming them with the right answer, presenting it so briefly that they were not consciously aware of it. But we found that some of our subjects, the ones that we had predicted it would happen to, they actually guessed above what you'd expect by chance, but only on the prime trials. If we didn't prime them, they didn't really have ESP. Now if you just said to these people afterwards, how were you doing that? How were you achieving that amazing performance? They wouldn't know. We knew, but they wouldn't know. And so there's a situation there where, some of the ideas from the study of consciousness actually fed directly into a possible explanation for certain kinds of ostensibly paranormal experience.
just been asked a question. I'm going to answer it. Somebody just put, do we believe that people can be reincarnated into future lives or past ones? No. There you go.
Actually, I must say that reincarnation is a fascinating topic, and I mean, last week I did actually join the Reincarnation Society. I don't know if you heard about this. Yeah, it cost me £500, which I thought was a bit steep. Then I thought, well, you only live once.
Oh, lordy! On that bombshell. ADT, thank you very much for your call. I am going to move on because we've got someone else who I understand wants to, want of a better word, brown nose, Chris.
Yeah.
And who can turn down some brown nosing on a Sunday morning? Welcome to the show, Rationalizer. Because Tony has started this call, Tony has to press the call button. And if Tony has walked away from his computer, no, it looks like he's back now. Thanks, Tony.
Here we go.
So it looks like he's busy. We'll keep trying.
No. I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey. No, I'm not calling to brown nose Chris in the slightest.
Thank you.
Is that rubbish? Absolutely rubbish. Right. When you were talking earlier about the press, that they include skeptics, but they don't really get much of a say, and it might not be worth it, and so on. I just want to see if you remember. It was probably between the years of something like 94 and 96. You were on a morning television program in the UK, and they were showing footage of what they were claiming was a spaceship crashing in the desert, and it was just a shiny object. And at the time, I was very keen on it being true that aliens were visiting Earth and so on. And I saw this footage and just thought, wow, that is brilliant. It's undeniable. And then this miserable git came on and said, oh, it just looks like a rocket to me. And I said, just looks like a rocket? How can this guy not be excited as I am? And you know, it was the way you just sat there completely and utterly unimpressed. It just completely depressed me. And I looked at it and thought, you know what? I really think it is just a rocket. So that worked, and I can remember that. That was like 15 years ago or something, and you know, that was probably my first experience of skepticism, which I confused with pessimism. I think that's quite a common thing. Skepticism and pessimism get mixed up. But that was my first introduction to thinking in a skeptical way. So having one for a couple of minutes on morning TV does make a difference sometimes.
Well, that's good to know. It really is good to know.
Another thing that you were talking about was people waking up paralysed, the heavy chest symptoms and so on. Well, I used to get this sort of stuff a lot, but I used to wake up to see werewolves, people having sex against my window.
That's amazing. Yeah, the variations that you get are absolutely incredible. I mean, some of the experiences that people report to you are just so bizarre and yet so incredibly spooky. I mean, one of my students suffered from this, and one of the episodes that he had, he'd woken up, couldn't move. There was a black cat by the side of the bed hissing at him. And that'd be pretty spooky anyway, but it wasn't an ordinary cat. Instead of an ordinary cat's head, it had an inverted cat's skull, and there was black goo dripping from the corners of the mouth. You think, where does an image like that come from? You know, it's so surreal and spooky, but, you know, as I say, there's such amazing variation in terms of what it is that people actually perceive, but certain common themes as well. I mean, I mentioned that in Newfoundland, they talk about the old hag, and a number of people have come up to me and said, well, that's what I see, and I've never heard about the old hag before. You know, it's not an idea that the wider culture has put in there. So I think there are these kinds of, you know, some of these images that are just kind of, I guess, you know, very deep part of our psyche.
Yeah, for example, when you were talking earlier about why do so many people include anal probes, and it's probably they're just having a dream and they've got constipation.
It could be all sorts of things that could be incorporated. I mean, I know another guy who suffered from sleep paralysis repeatedly and never ever involved any kind of aliens until he found out about the fact that there was a link between alien abduction claims and sleep paralysis. And the very next episode he had, there's a little 4-foot-high grey alien at the end of his bed. And even at the time when it was happening, he thought that was funny. You know, you can see the funny side of that. But yeah, these things can be incorporated and all. See, what you've essentially got with sleep paralysis, it takes place when the body is in a very similar state to REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is typically associated with dreaming. And when you are in REM sleep, the muscles of the body are actually paralyzed. Normally, you're not consciously aware of it because you're consciously aware of what's happening in your dream. But with sleep paralysis, you become consciously, you're like your brain's woken up, but your body hasn't. So, and then you get this interesting kind of mixed consciousness that's a mix of normal waking consciousness and dream consciousness. And you know, your mind's just trying to make the best sense of what's going on, but it can't move. You've got all this dream imagery coming through, but you can see you're in your bedroom, you know, which can be very, very scary.
Chris, I wonder if you can assist me in this regard. Obviously, as I enter old age, opportunities for interaction with other people is limited, and I'd like to have erotic dreams, but I've never been able to do it. Is there any advice you can give to me on how I have an erotic dream?
Well, apparently, I mean, I've never done this. You can train yourself to become a lucid dreamer. There's a whole body of research on this.
Can you send me all the relevant papers?
I can send. Drop me. I'll send you some links.
Are you being serious? You're going to train yourself? Tell us about lucid dreaming.
Well, lucid dreaming is, you know, it's a way of alerting yourself to the fact that you are dreaming while you are having the dream. You know, most of us, as I said before, if you're dreaming, your consciousness is there in the dream, but there are ways that you can train yourself so that you can pick up on the fact, haha, I'm dreaming. And apparently, if you kind of practice these techniques, you can actually control what takes place in the dream. So it sounds like it's the perfect answer to your problems there, DPR. You can have your own virtual reality world that you totally do whatever the hell you like. But just don't ever get confused between that and reality and start doing some of that stuff in reality, or you're in trouble.
I think the problem is, though, DPR, you also need to have some amount of imagination. So, you know, you're not gonna get anywhere, are you? You know, the best you'll manage is you'll feed the cat before you go to bed, and that's all you'll be able to think about. So maybe it's best not to go into the realm of erotic dreams.
All I do is try and help people, help charity work, and all I get is grief and insults. I just don't know why people are so cruel to me.
Sorry, you go ahead, Sarah.
I think you've been asked about 6 times. Chris, do you know anything about ASMR?
No. ASMR?
That's what it says here. Is there something similar?
No. Well, tell us what for the first time what it stands for.
Give us some info and we'll get back to it. Right, sorry. You're saying, sir, whichever one of you is in the middle of the bickering contest.
I've given up. I'm sure there was more about conspiracy theories that I wanted to talk about, but rather than do that, again, one of your television appearances where you did a double-blind experiment. It was a program which Richard Dawkins was involved in as well, and it involved dowsing. Yeah. And what was interesting for me is that even when these people had been shown that they had absolutely no ability at all, they couldn't accept it. They wouldn't accept it. And it made me feel somewhat pessimistic in mankind and humanity as a whole. You know, if you can, in the face of overwhelming evidence, if you cannot accept it, what hope is there for us as a species? Are we doomed?
Well, in the long term, yes, because the sun's going to expand, but that's not for a while yet. I wouldn't be quite so pessimistic. I always think of these things in terms of, it's not just trying to have an effect on, say, the person who thinks they've got the powers, but maybe affecting the beliefs of those people who think, yeah, I wonder if that guy really does have those amazing powers. And I mean, I think anybody who saw the test that we did with the dowsers, or any of the other tests that we've done with psychic claimants, yeah, we bend over backwards to make sure that they are happy with the test conditions before we start the test, and they sign something to that effect. And as you say, it's only afterwards when they've failed the test that they then say, oh, actually, it wasn't a fair test. You know, now, I mean, that can be very, very...
It's not so much that. I remember one woman who was adamant, well, I wanted to walk on top of it. I was asking for planks and top, and, you know, it's never failed me before. Belligerent. Disregard for the evidence.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you're not going to convince those people, or you're very, very unlikely to convince those people. But a lot of the other people who maybe have heard about dowsing and think, oh yeah, dowsing works, doesn't it? To actually say, well, no, it doesn't. When you test it properly, it doesn't. Those are the people you can hope to sway. And I think generally, you know, we maybe do manage to do that. So,
and on that bombshell, Chris, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. It's very rude of me. Please carry on.
That's okay. I was just wondering your whatever it was.
Oh, yes, it was. Where was it? It was audio sensory meridian something.
No, I don't. No. Sorry.
We'll get back. Yeah.
On that bombshell, Chris doesn't know everything. Rationalizer, thank you very much indeed for the call. We have to remove you now because we've got 2 minutes to go, and there's a couple of announcements I want to make. People, I say this all the time, and people, I don't think they believe me. I am dyslexic. Only I could put up Cult of Dusty as Cult of Destiny in my promotional video. Only I could have referred to Serious Mind as Serious Minded for the last 3 years without realizing. I apologize to you, Sirius, because you are coming up next. We look forward to that. After that, we did have Noel Plum. Noel Plum is not going to be able to join us. I'm not going to go into why. I have found a substitute which I can assure you no one will ever have seen before, but I think is going to be enormous fun. That's in 2 hours' time. After that is the Peach. Then we've got the Thinking Atheist, who will be conducting an interview with Jessica Alquist, who you ought to know, I'm sure you do. Then we have Aaron Ra interviewing James Randi. Then we have me, Matt Dillahunty, and Aaron Ra, if I am in fact still awake. Can I ask everyone please to give a huge thumbs up to Richard, Mr. Godbehere, and also Professor Chris French. It's been a pleasure to have you both on. It's been really interesting, and I'm likely, if it's okay, Chris, to come and try and track you down for an appearance on the Magic Sandwich Show sometime. I think that would be very interesting.
That'd be great.
But thank you very much indeed for your time. Please, everyone, remember this is a charity event, and we are trying to raise money. Please go to one of those links above the video box. You will not lose your place in the room. You won't be disconnected. They will open up in a separate window. It will take you 2 minutes to make a donation. Please do so. On that bombshell, Tony, could you end the show? Thank you very much. If you stay on the call, I'll have a quick chat with you